So welcome to the Google Hangout on Air about the World Pride Human Rights Conference. I'm Brenda Kosman. I'm one of the co-chairs for the World Pride Human Rights Conference that starts next week, June 25th to 27th. We're here today to talk a little bit about what that conference is about, what is so exciting about the conference. We have a number of speakers from the conference joining us here today. And just to give a little bit of background about the conference, so we have over 400 delegates coming to the conference from over 51 countries. Incredible representation from really from around the world, dealing with the incredible breadth of issues that are relevant to the LGBTQ communities globally today. We have panels and panelists discussing everything from youth and education issues, employment issues, trans issues, aging issues, HIV/AIDS issues, just a truly extraordinary range of panelists and topics. We have, some of them are arranged thematically, some of our panels are really directly addressing some of today's hotspots around the world, whether it's Russia or Uganda or Nigeria, the Caribbean, some of the places where there have been some new and particularly regressive laws that have been introduced. Other panelists are addressing, we have panelists from across Asia who are talking about some really exciting developments in their countries. One of my personal favorites is a panel on aging that has someone presenting from Taiwan talking about the rainbow bus on the move. And I don't know really what they do on that bus, but I know I want to get on that bus because it's somehow taking around elderly LGBT people on a rainbow bus, and I just think that's fabulous. We just have really an incredible array, and I think it's a really exciting opportunity for us to come together and talk about both the state of human rights today, the state of LGBT human rights across the globe, to come together to share the stories of resistance, to share the stories of hope, and to talk with each other about how to actually build real networks, how to build real alliances across geographic, national, cultural borders. What would it mean for some of us in the West to be real allies to folks who are in, say, some of the hot spots? It's one thing to just, say, oh gosh, what's happening in Uganda is terrible. That's not very helpful. What can we actually do to really support folks, the activists who are struggling on the ground? What can we do to build real international solidarity? And that, for me, is what is so exciting about this conference. Obviously, it's a lot to do in 3 days. We can't solve the problems of the world in 3 days, but hopefully what we can do is build some new friendships, some alliances, develop some strategies, and come away hopefully feeling very inspired to continue this struggle after the 3 days that we've been together. So I think that's enough from me, and I want to turn it over now to our panelists, who will each introduce themselves as they speak, and we encourage you to send in your questions because we will be doing a Q&A, so please send in your questions for our panelists. And yeah, over to you now.
Hi. So on the list, it looks like I'm next on the list. So I'm Grace Poor. I'm with the International Gay and Lesbian Human Rights Commission. I'm the Regional Program Coordinator for Asia. And is my audio level okay? Okay, great. And I coordinated a 5-country research project on violence against lesbians, bisexual women, and transgender individuals in Japan, Malaysia, Pakistan, the Philippines, and Sri Lanka. Now, the research was actually conducted by LBT groups in these countries, and their findings are presented in a regional report that Eaglehawk just released last month. And you can download the report from our website. There are also hard copies available. Now, on June 27th, at this Human Rights Conference in Toronto, 3 of us will be speaking on a panel on the findings from this research. Joining me will be Asuza Yamashita, who coordinated the research in Japan, Angie Umbach, who coordinated the research in the Philippines. And 370 interviews were conducted. Out of that, 230 of them were with LGBT individuals who experienced violence. And I'd like to just share some of the main issues that we will be discussing at this workshop. It'll be a panel, there'll be a discussion with the audience that will follow. The most surprising finding was the significance that LGBT people who were interviewed placed on violence by family members. This was a surprising finding, given that many of them had also experienced violence outside the home, by many perpetrators outside the home. So we will talk about the centrality of family violence in Asia and what are the implications for advocacy and policy. The most disturbing finding was the degree to which the violence was normalized by the perpetrators, who justified the violent actions as correcting non-conformity, non-conforming sexual orientation or gender identity. And it was also normalized by the individuals who experienced the violence because many of them saw it as somehow inevitable. Inevitable because they had brought unwanted attention to their families, they had hurt their parents, they felt that because they had defied codes of behavior. So there was a certain sense that not only that the violence was inevitable, but that when the violence happened, they were somehow responsible for dealing with it on their own, that they could not turn to the state, definitely not the state. They couldn't turn to even service providers who existed to help people in emergency situations where there were violence. So that was the other very disturbing finding, that even in spaces, even services that were set up for emergency support services, LGBT people were locked out of those services by medical facilities, counselors, domestic violence shelters, women's NGOs, when they were experiencing violence. So that was a very disturbing finding. It was also noticeable that where there was an overarching climate of intolerance and hate and impunity, whether because the laws were punitive or religious leaders used messaging, government leaders condemned LGBT people, when there was that kind of overarching climate, that backdrop, it translated into violence in the home. That impunity was mirrored in the home. So many of the individuals who were interviewed talked about having to experience everything from verbal denigration to physical assaults, to bullying, whether it's schools, at work, in public spaces, and then having to come home and deal with the hostilities by family members. So they didn't really have a place to go. And then I'll talk about one more thing and then stop, which is laws that existed in these 5 countries to prohibit some of the crimes, some of the offenses, like rape, like sexual harassment, like domestic violence, like, partner violence. These kinds of laws that existed to protect people did not extend to lesbians, bisexual women, and trans individuals. The laws themselves were discriminatory. The language was exclusionary. And even when the language could technically protect someone, could be used by someone, say if a law says, even in a de facto relationship, even where there was no marriage, say if violence is going on, individuals can rely on this law for protection. LGBT people couldn't rely on that law because there were other laws on the books that criminalized them. So on one hand, there was no legal protection for them because the laws were exclusionary. On the other hand, there were laws that criminalized them. So seeking help outside was very, very difficult, and in fact was a risk for reporting the violence. So these will be the findings and research that we will be sharing, and then we will basically engage in a discussion with the audience about what this means and what we found and how we are interpreting the findings and what we're going to do, what each of the country partners are going to do with the findings in terms of advocacy on the ground. And I'll stop here.
Thank you, Grace. Let's check the Q&A app and see what we have from the audience. So this is our first question. Shouldn't we focus more on the grassroots LGBT community? Who's doing that to me? Shouldn't we focus more on the grassroots LGBT community support and safety to keep community from becoming completely fractured, instead of putting all focus in advocacy and law changes in the current rising anti-gay legal climate in post-Soviet countries? So Grace, maybe you can explain from your experience in Asia, what is the importance of the grassroots movement and what is the importance of actually changing laws and policies?
Yeah, the groups that conducted the research, they themselves are, many of them are grassroots activists, so they're tapped into their communities. This was not academic research. This was research that was conducted by people who were working within their communities, who were part of those communities. Many of them also experienced different kinds of violations in their families outside the home by the law officers and so on. So the findings are very much about educating the community that these experiences occur, that they are prevalent, that when people are experiencing this violence, they're not alone, and that something has to be done about it, which includes pushing, for instance, the women's movement to be more open to providing supportive services to LGBT people who experience violence, to sensitizing, for instance, mental health providers and lawyers about these issues and the difficulties to seek redress. So some, like the Philippines, will be using their findings to change the law because they are currently working on putting in place an anti-discrimination bill that is going to also extend protections to LGBT people. So these findings will be very useful to prove that there are violations taking place, and when there is no protection from discrimination, official recognition for LGBT people, there is no protection. So it's not just about changing laws, but it's about each country will use it differently, each country team will use it differently, not only LGBT people, but also their allies. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you, Grace. That's very interesting. Okay, so we're going to pass on to our next speaker, Richard from Uganda. And keep in mind, throughout the whole chat, the Q&A app is open. Grace is going to still be with us, so if you have questions about violence through the lens of lesbian, bisexual, and trans women in Asia, Grace is the expert on that topic. Okay, so Richard, can you unmute yourself and tell us a bit about your topic of LGBT resilience and resistance in Uganda?
Thank you very much, and I'm so glad to be part of this panel discussion. Our panel is We Are Here, Resilience and Resistance, and we'll be focusing on the plight, successes, and challenges that LGBTI Ugandan people are facing at the current moment. Just has been introduced, I'm Richard Lusimbo from Sexual Minorities Uganda. SMUG is a network of LGBT organizations in Uganda, and currently we have 18 member organizations. Our discussion will be focusing on the research that we've been carrying out since 2012, and we've been documenting different cases of violations and discrimination against the LGBTI people, but also focusing on the lives of LGBTI Ugandans and trying to identify the kind of life that people live in and the kind of plight I've been facing. And we'll also be highlighting at the discussion, at the panel, the kind of history and the background of the anti-homosexuality bill in Uganda, focusing and looking at the bill that was introduced in 2009 in October actually had a backing from American evangelicals like Scott Lively, who actually in 2009, early that year, had come to Uganda and met the MPs, members of parliament and different governmental officials, and immediately he left. The anti-homosexuality bill was actually tabled in the House that same year. We'll be discussing the role played by the American evangelicals and other extremists who are Christian fanatics who call themselves, who are led by God, and how they have played a great role into promoting homophobia and actually pushing and making sure that the anti-homosexuality law is what it is today. I will also be talking about when the bill was passed by Parliament. That was last year in December, and then it was signed by the President on the 24th of February. And we immediately saw, we shall be highlighting what really happened immediately the bill was signed by the President, whereby the media took on itself by outing LGBTI Ugandans. The following day, after the President had signed the bill, a Ugandan tabloid called Red Pepper went ahead to actually list 200 names of LGBTI Ugandans. And this did not actually think, or they did not even care about people who were in the closet. They did not care about young LGBTI people. All they did was they just listed 200 names. And immediately the following day, they started publishing pictures. And all this we'll be bringing it up during our discussion and trying to show the kind of role the media has played in promoting homophobia in our country, vis-a-vis the role played by the evangelicals. So these are some of the discussions, but we shall also discuss about the celebration that even given the persecution, given the very difficulties, we will also love to share, to show the kind of life that the LGBTI people live outside that. We'll also highlight and show that 2012, we shall show images, we shall show part and talk about the work and what was done around the very first Pride that was carried out in 2012 in Uganda. And why do we do this? Is because we want to show the rest of the world that actually LGBTI people have a life even when cases or right now the situation may be extreme, but they find some space within that difficulty to actually celebrate who they are and celebrate the diversity and actually look out to work with the rest of the community. We'll also highlight about the engagement of different stakeholders to find leeway, to find possibilities of working as a team. For example, like we are currently engaged in talking to the Inspector General Police, because the police has been playing a very big role in terms of arrest and harassment of LGBTI Ugandans. They have been actually calling upon the media to actually out people. And so we're going to try also show this work that actually activists and different organizations are dedicated to actually engage even those who feel who are persecutors, but we are not giving up. And that's why we also carry the topic, resilience and resistance, is that we are not resting until LGBTI Ugandans are liberated. This may not be today, this may not be tomorrow, but we have hope, and we know that actually Ugandan LGBT at one time immemorial will actually celebrate their adversity. So currently we're also working hard, and we shall also highlight what are some of the things that are being focused on. We'll also highlight the report from Sexual Minorities Uganda, which was published in the first week of May, which showed that actually from the period of 20th December last year, when the bill was passed by Parliament and when it was signed by the President in February, period of 20th December to 1st May, there was a very high increase in terms of violations against LGBTI people, and in that small period recorded over 162 cases of people who had been banished from their homes, people who have been evicted, people who have been beaten off the street. And all this is the discussion that we're going to come up with at a panel, and we'll be expecting lots of questions, and we'll have a very discussions here, and we really hope to at the end of it all to all be clear about what can be done, but also what can we do right now to ensure that actually LGBTI Ugandans are protected, even when the situation may look as hard as it is. Thank you very much.
So Richard, we have our first question from you, for you. Errol asks, John Baird talks, but Canada does not offer refugee status to gay Ugandans. Canada even denied visitors visas in case they might stay. So we all heard about this in the news. Could you provide some context to this from your dealings?
I think the Foreign Affairs Minister of Canada has spoken around LGBTI issues, more so when the bill was tabled in Parliament, but also in 2012 he had a very big clash with the Speaker of Parliament, Rebecca Kadaga, when he mentioned about the issue of human rights and discrimination of LGBTI persons in Uganda. And actually this led to a very big backlash to the LGBTI community in Uganda. When the Speaker of Parliament returned, she was given a heroic welcome at the airport, and immediately she promised to pass the bill as a Christmas gift. And that was a very difficult moment for us, because that's even the time the media came up in talking about how foreign powers are actually trying to recolonize Uganda, which is a sovereign state, by using homosexuality as a basis to do that. And when the bill was passed, still the Foreign Affairs Minister came out and said Canada will support LGBTI Ugandans in whatever ways. But in terms of denying visas, this was actually a very big surprise and shock to us. When I personally was denied a visa to come to this conference. When I first applied, I was denied visa, and some of the reasons that were given was that my purpose of visit was not clear, and that I had not proven financial enough that I would actually cater for myself here, yet I had even provided all the information. So this denial of visas was kind of double standards at play, and I think as LGBTI Ugandans, we've seen this from different governments around the world, and this is not only affecting Uganda but other countries, whereby lots of promises are always made to LGBTI persons, but at the end of it all, different powers always look at their personal interests and before the LGBTI people. Because if anyone should come, because there's no way I was going to give a presentation unless I came to a country, unless if they were thinking of me speaking from Skype or something, but the assumption that LGBTI Ugandans are coming to actually seek asylum, I think that was highly rated. And in any case, if anyone was to ask for asylum, I think they are at liberty to do so in any country that they choose. But I think this was very unfortunate, and I hope other people will be considered so that they can be part of this. Thank you.
Oh, there's a question from the Q&A, and it says, Under this situation where LGBT individuals are criminalized and even persecuted to the extent of escaping to neighboring countries, how can external forces help and play a part in the effort?
Hey, Richard, you're muted right now. We can't hear you. You just need to unmute yourself first.
Okay. I think there are around three things that we could do or could be done. First, we have like currently people who are in Kenya and are living in dire situations. If there will be any support towards those, and this support going through organizations, not actually targeting individuals, I think this will be very, very important to work with local organizations to support these people. And the other thing I think is to call upon different governments to speak out on the plight of LGBTI Ugandans, but also other LGBTI people who are facing persecution. And how to do this is, like for example, Uganda, we sent out guidelines to international partners and friends of how to engage, not actually speaking as though you're ordering the government. I think dialogue is the key and the important issue right now. If the foreign affairs minister can call the Ugandan president or the prime minister or talk to the fellow counterpart, or actually if we can have different citizens around the world raising their voices in solidarity with Ugandan LGBTI, this can go a very, very long way. And there is need to provide services, and there is no way you can provide these services without resources. This is something else that we need to look into, that we could extend, so that actually like HIV/AIDS treatment, whereby LGBTI people are discriminated against, and even the spaces that they can go to, like Waterreed was raided, which was American funded project, and they were providing MSM, services through MSM, and it was raided. Now people cannot access the ARVs just because the space was now closed. So if resources can be targeted and found out to support the local organizing, if they can engage with the local organizing, then that's the only way we can actually work together and support different people who actually are facing the persecution.
Oh, thank you, Richard, for that wonderful conversation you just had with us. My name is Gerouki Femi. I'm a Centennial College student from Nigeria, and this piece I'll be giving is a personal reflection. As you all know, Nigeria is one of the hotspots for anti-LGBT laws, and the movement is not very strong back home. So I'll be reading a piece I wrote. It's a personal reflection for me, and I'd like to share it with the rest of the world. My name is Gerouki Femi. I am from Nigeria, and this is a personal reflection of mine. I apologize for being homophobic in the past. I apologize for not questioning those who told me lies about why being gay is considered abnormal. I apologize for believing everything I was told and not having to reason on my own. I apologize for believing that being gay means being possessed by evil spirits sent by the devil from the pits of hell. I apologize for believing I can be infected by gayism, if there's such a word. I apologize for coming from a country that has blindly passed a law that bans the LGBT to 14 years in prison. I apologize for a country that doesn't believe in tolerance, fairness, and equity. A country that refuses to believe in change and insists on following the path of ignorance. Perhaps we can have a look at South Africa and look at the freedom and fairness that the LGBT community exists, and how everyone gets along fine by having the spirit of tolerance. Perhaps we can pride ourselves in the fact that major events such as the FIFA World Cup, which was held in South Africa, cannot be held in Nigeria because these organizations instill freedom, fairness, and no form of discrimination into their policies. We need to embrace tolerance and wake up from our slumber. Let us build a free and fair environment where no one will have his or her rights suppressed, but instead be tolerant of each other as a tool to peaceful coexistence. The wave of homophobia is gradually subsiding, and this community will not be oppressed anymore. It will become the norm, and there will be freedom and equity. This is a personal reflection of mine, which I carefully thought about, and it's the scenario is way much larger than expected back home, and coming from a country like that, I understand where most of the people that are going through that are homophobic. I understand where they're coming from because we are a country that is we are very immersed in religion and traditional values. So it's going to take a huge wave of positive contributions to actually change a country with such values. So I will implore everyone to continue to use our strengths in the digital world to continue to reach out to Nigeria and Nigerians and continue to pass the message across. Thank you.
Very good. Do you want to introduce the next speaker? Introduce the next speaker.
So thanks for that, Femi. So next we're going to have Hung from China, and he's going to be talking a bit about LGBT human rights in the workplace in China.
Hello. All right. I just been cut off for a while, but it's good to be back. Just in time. First of all, I want to thank you very much for having me here, and it's truly a great honor. As some of my friends always ask me, like China is such a mysterious country, and what's happening with the LGBT people there. So actually, it's been a great honor for me to speak today and share a little bit about at a conference about what's happening in China, not only about the workplace, but in general the human rights issues for LGBT population. And so actually, China is at the stage of becoming more open and welcoming. Even probably some of you know that like Twitter and Facebook are still blocked, Gmail is still blocked in China, but we really did make a lot of progress, which I'm going to share with you during my
Jacob is actually in China, so he's having some difficulty accessing because Google Hangouts is blocked in China. So actually censorship is an interesting issue that we could talk about through this chat. He's going to work on his connection, and we're going to move to the next speaker, and we will come back to Jacob and his analysis on LGBT rights in the workplace in China. So we're going to welcome Caleb now. Caleb, would you sub in for Jacob and discuss your topic of LGBT lives in the Caribbean from Belize?
Okay, am I on? Ready? Okay. So, hi everybody. I've been doing this for almost 8 years, and working with a network called Carry Flags. It's the Caribbean Forum for the Lesbian World Pride Conference. Okay, so I've been working with a regional group called Carry Flags and trying to coordinate knowledge, sharing experiences, and so on. And what we found is that our friends in Jamaica, I euphemistically call them friends because they're the far right as you can get, uses the same tactic in Belize or vice versa. And this plays out because of the influence of U.S. right-wing groups influencing local evangelicals, not only in Belize but across the region. What we've seen here in Belize is the effects, which are marches and protests and effigies that plays along the so-called building the capacity of evangelical groups. I just came across from OAS conference, OAS General Assembly meeting in Paraguay, and what I learned from foreign ministers say St. Lucia, from Antigua, St. Kitts Nevis, is that that fundamentalist thinking, or in this case, dominionist thinking, has played a vital role in how they absolve themselves from responsibility of governance, or how much they move towards addressing the issues of discrimination and violence. For us here in Belize, I'm the claimant for the challenging our sodomy law. In the US, it's Texas versus Lawrence. In Jamaica, it's going to be Javid. And we've seen the effects of when LGBT individuals seek to demand rights enforcement, rights protection in the court, and what plays out in terms of the structural barriers, what plays out in the lack of mechanism support in that process. For us, the important thing is that we've learned there are opportunities and we can use leverages. The leveraging being the OAS, UN body system, the various diplomatic connections we have as a country, and UN agencies to dialogue and engage with our government. This is important because in 2007, when we tried to first process, they refused, or there was no interest in talking to us. Now I have my foreign minister inviting me to his office at least twice a year, and at the OES, my foreign minister and the entire Belize delegation discussing with me strategies as to how to combat some of the evangelization of human rights. What we've learned with our evangelical friends is that they have been trying to stigmatize human rights as only LGBT, or they've been trying to stigmatize rights as an issue of abortion, and the government has been struggling to arbitrate between the two. Our job here is, as I see it, is to prevent the erosion of the high level of tolerance that we have in this country, and to balance that off with changing the people's understanding of what the evangelical impact is. And for us here and across the region, it's really about promoting the dominionist theology of the 7 pillars, which would refer to controlling education, government, business, health, art and culture, media, family. And so our job is to stop that. And one way we did that was issue a report on our opponents here. And we did a regional presentation on how the dominionist movement have been slowly trickling across the region. And so what we realized for CARICOM countries and Belize in particular is that we're at a new battleground along with Africa and Latin America in terms of the level of fight that's gone on in Canada, the US and Europe. and our work continues, limited as it is. That. I'm done. Can you hear me? I'm done. Done.
Thank you.
Okay,
thank you, Caleb.
Okay,
I
good.
just want to finish off by showing some photos you brought of LGBT situation in Belize.
Yeah. So that was an example of people who did not even read the policy, or who do not bother to do any research in our work to lie about LGBT work, and that's just one of 4 years of back and forth lines, rallies, protests that is going on in this country. I remain the face of the issue, and with that comes the need to watch my back in terms of security and so on and so on. I'm done now. Finish.
Thank you, Caleb. We are happy to welcome back Jacob. Hey, Jacob. So let's give it another shot and see if you can stay connected right now and beat the censorship. So Jacob, you need to unmute yourself right now. Okay, Jacob got kicked out again. Margarita, will you take the lead right now and discuss your topic, sub in for Jacob, who's been kicked out again? So just unmute yourself and give us a quick summary on your session topic for World Pride Human Rights Conference.
Okay, hi everybody from me. I'm Margarita, I come from Greece, and I'm an educator myself. I've been working in primary schools, and at the moment I've been working as an educational advisor. I have a specialty, let's say, in sex education, which is an issue that doesn't exist in the Greek schools. And the last couple of years, I had the opportunity to talk to different school settings about sexuality and sex education. And I've been talking to children in primary schools, but also higher, upper secondary or lower secondary. And from that experience, I realized that children and young people in Greece are completely ignorant. And they don't understand LGBT issues, which is, that's the least bad. The worst is that they have so many misconceptions. So I tried to, with my research, I tried to explore young people that they are still in the upper secondary, let's say almost 18 years old, like from 16 to 18 years old, their perception of LGBT persons. And I have somehow been finding out that there are, first of all, big misconception of what is it to be a homosexual, for example. And the other thing that has been interesting in my findings is the young people's in Greece difficulty to understand that the human rights, let's say, approach, that they have been really considering about LGBT families, and they have been really pondering and wondering about the rights these people should have, which, as again I realize, is based on ignorance. So from my research, and what I would like really to talk about, is the need for alliances. Because on the one hand, I realize that the young people, at least those that I've been talking with, or those that have been asking me questions, they do have these misconceptions. On the other hand, I realize that they are really willing to listen. So this is a very good thing. And I believe that the only way to overcome the ignorance and the bullying that comes from ignorance, because so far I realize that the Greek schools are a very hostile environment for LGBT people, and the only way to do that is to have an alliance between LGBT and non-LGBT people, and make these two parties listen to each other. As one of my research informants, a young student, said that I really would like to understand how it is. I have never really talked with anyone. They get their ideas from some media representations or some very, well, let's say, popular images, and they don't really understand what it is. So what I try to advocate myself is that we need more understanding, and the only way to do that is to have education. And because in Greece things are better but not that good, the only way to get this education is to use the activist, let's say, group of people, to be activist for education, especially sex education, and putting the LGBT issues as in a very central part of that education. Because my experience is that the young people are really interested, and they have a lot of questions, and they don't get proper answers because those people, like educational people, we're failing them. So this is pretty much what I am going to talk about. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. So we're going to take another question from the audience. Where is it? Oh, yes. It says, I joined late, so sorry if you have covered this. We haven't actually. So what is the situation for intersex individuals? So panelists, could you share in your countries the situation for intersex individuals? Richard, you can start with this.
Okay, thank you. Currently, we have one dedicated organization that specifically works on intersex issues in Uganda, and SMAG and other organizations supplement on its work. But I've been doing a lot of work in terms of meeting with Ministry of Health to change policies, because children have at birth, they've not been having a choice of parents whereby children have been assigned a different sex just because the doctor felt that was suiting of the parents before they could go with the children. So there have been so many cases of people who were assigned a wrong sex at birth, and actually at adulthood it has affected them. And there have been also issues in terms of discrimination in the society of intersex people. but CPID, an organization that is dedicated to work on intersex issues, has been really working hard closely with partners to ensure that actually the Ministry of Health comes on board, because the policies that govern the medical fraternity come from the Ministry of Health, but also sensitizing the communities, the sensitization around how to accept intersex children, and also making sure that also raising money, because there's a time we had a case of whereby an international organization raised money to actually change the sex of a young boy, but even before the tests were done, the medical practitioner went ahead to go ahead with this operation, and in a few weeks' time, there were complications. And as the medical personnel, we faulted the doctor, because the doctor is supposed to know when and how to conduct less an operation, or when to administer that kind of medication. So there's been a lot of sensitization in terms of the medical practitioners themselves to also work with the issues around prejudice, and also trying to separate the issue, because there's been a whole big confusion of an intersex person with a gay person or a lesbian. So there have been all these kind of misconceptions, and this has created a lot of discrimination for the intersex people. Even we've seen different young girls or young boys dropping out of school, and all these challenges. This still remains a very big challenge, and we do not have the right laws to actually protect the intersex people from birth, and also when they actually reach of age and they would want to to change to the rightful sex. All these are still challenges that we are still facing, and hopefully with the kind of work that we are doing and CPID, we'll be able to change that situation. Thanks.
Okay, hi, my name's Felicia. I'm a student at Centennial College as well, and for my country expose, I've been researching Iran, and particularly the landscape for intersex, transsexuals, and lesbians in Iran. As I'm sure most of you know, it's quite a negative landscape right now. Being gay or lesbian is punishable by death, which is very extreme, obviously. And but within this, there's this ironic, almost progressiveness that we see in terms of being going through sexual reassignment surgery. Iran itself, under Sharia law, forgive me if I pronounce anything wrong, states that homosexuality is completely illegal. So to fix this, because there is such a rigid gender binary there, they actually have one of the most high-tech medical hospitals called the Saleh Women's Hospital in Tehran that deals with hundreds of thousands of sex change surgery, reassignment surgeries a year. The medical treatment for this actually started in Iran in the 1930s, and then by the 1960s, sex change surgeries for specifically intersexed individuals became pretty prevalent. They started to intermix different terminology, such as calling a person who was intersexed having a gender disorder. And the first actual non-intersex operation was in the 70s in Iran, and then within 3 years, actually, from 73 to 76, 50 people were seen to go under sex reassignment surgeries, and the number just boomed from then, because actually it was found that when they looked at the law and they looked at the Quran, there was nothing that said that you could not go through a sex reassignment surgery. All the Quran stated was that a man would not lie with a man and a woman would not lie with a woman. So in the 70s, when Khomeini came into power, he proposed a fatwa that said that, yes, this was okay. So since the 60s, sex reassignment surgery has actually really been booming. And it's interesting because although the laws for women, on top of just the laws for homosexuality, are so intense and are so oppressive, that women who are lesbians find that one of the only ways to escape this rigidity is to actually go through the sex reassignment surgery, because when they become with a male genitalia, they actually get to assume all the privileges that a male assumes from birth. So it's actually really interesting because the whole idea is that it's based on your mind, and that men and women are inherently different, yet you are simply changing the genitalia, and then all of a sudden the person gains all of the characteristics of a man. It obviously doesn't compute, and that's a little bit crazy. So actually a lot of women go through this every single year, and they actually find that because the law and just reading from the Quran teaches them to have so much self-hate for their sexual orientation as a lesbian, that women have been quoted saying that going through this surgery has actually been so good for their mind and has changed their mindset and made them comfortable with who they are, which is just shows how deeply ingrained these horrible ideals of gender are in this environment, which is really, really interesting and really scary. You also get a lot of health insurance and a lot of financial assistance for going through the sexual reassignment surgery. You also get military service exemption, and you get housing aid as well. And it's not uncommon for people in the international community to go to Iran to have their sexual reassignment surgery done, because the surgery there is actually valued from $4,000 to $6,000, as opposed to like somewhere in the States where you're looking at up to like $75,000. So it's a pretty unique situation there. Obviously, there's tremendous issues to be covered, but it is a unique area for lesbians to sort of carve out space and a voice within a place where they are completely oppressed to the point of they'll have to endure death or stoning if they do come out as a lesbian. So there really isn't actually a lesbian community that's public at all in Iran, according to the research that I'm seeing. So that's pretty much most of what I've...
Yeah, hi. I wanted to address a question that was posed by Zenith Chua about the role of allies in the struggles for LGBT rights. Allies are absolutely critical. Civil society allies, as well as allies in the state sector, as well as religious allies. One of the reasons that allies are critical, like for example, civil society allies, is to link the struggle of LGBT people with other struggles. Because many people experience multiple layers of discrimination. They experience violence in cross-cutting ways. So for example, if you have an individual who happens to be from an ethnic minority group, or happens to be from a particular religious group, or a particular economic background, say a poor person, when those identity markers are also visible, and then that person's sexual orientation or gender identity is also visible, then the opportunities for violence or discrimination increases. And so we really cannot afford to just look at rights through a very narrow lens, but also to link it to other rights, because LGBT rights are definitely linked with labor rights, with the struggles to end poverty and homelessness, with anti-racism struggles. So I think that's very critical, both for LGBT activists as well as other human rights activists and women's rights activists and so on, to work together on this. In terms of allies at the state level, there are always allies there, just as long as there are very dangerous opponents. Unfortunately, they don't often speak up when they need to. Similarly, with religious moderates who are allies, it's easier for people to stay silent. So one of the things that we do collectively, I think, is to strengthen the spaces, the voices, and the opportunities for allies to also speak up.
Thanks a lot, Grace. We also have a comment here from Rick out in the cyber world there. He basically says that Margarita has a very valid point about educating youth. Suggestion maybe have a human rights committee to be educated on how to represent and educate everyone about LGBTQ human rights. This could be a great way to help promote human rights in the world. So that's sort of a comment by Rick. Right now, I guess we want to introduce Leanna Lee. She's one of the Giselle student participants. She has a little thing that she would like to read for the group also.
Okay. So, hey everyone. As Gabriel introduced, my name's Leanna. So basically what happened is we went on this Giselle project from Centennial College, which is basically a global citizen and equity learning experience where you go to a different location and you learn about something new. So basically in this case we were learning about LGBT human rights, and we also had a chance to learn more about different human rights violations which was going on around the world. So I'd like to thank you guys for having me here, and it's been a lot of firsts for me. So I initially didn't really have a lot of experience in the whole LGBT community when I initially came here. So it was really interesting really getting involved because I wanted to learn how to create a more positive environment for the world around me, and like I feel like this conference here is a great way where we're learning to really impact the society in a way that I feel is very beneficial. So basically, when we went to New York for a trip, we had the chance to go to the Museum of Tolerance, where we got to see how LGBT rights were violated, propaganda, learned about different like the Holocaust, and all these different visuals, which really made me think about, wow, what kind of world are we living in? And then it really gave me a lot to think about in terms of how we go about things as a society, and it also something which was really interesting for me was we went to the UN, where although it was on American territory or like in their land, basically when we went on, they made it very clear that the UN building, that location belonged to everyone who was part of the UN. So I thought that was kind of great how you could still have so many different cultures in the same place collaborating together. So for my analysis report that we also did in addition to this Giselle as part of it, I did mine on Singapore, which I found to be really interesting because initially when I was looking for a country, I was like, okay, LGBT rights is like completely illegal in these countries, and then I go to Singapore and it's like, it's not illegal for females to like be in LGBT relationships, but it is for males. So that kind of got me thinking like, okay, why is it this way? And then despite Singapore being like a very advanced place in terms of like technology and like their culture, they're still like very traditional in how they do things. So I just found it very interesting how because of that tradition and because they didn't want to kind of force LGBT on like people who aren't already accepting it, they're like, okay, we'll just keep in this law against males that could have them like in prison for 2 years if they engage in LGBT relationship. So I just found it very interesting that Singapore kind of had this viewpoint, and it also made me think, okay, what's the difference between genders? And just throughout this entire process, it's really been a learning experience, and I love the fact that we're all doing this together and we're just having the chance to speak our own opinions and really create a change in the world that we're having today. And do this whole pre-conference, and it's great. Thank you.
Awesome. So we have one more question. This one is for all of the panelists. The question is from Leandro. How are LGBT rights being tackled through an intersectional lens that encompasses the many identities involved with the oppression of LGBT folks in your country? So as we know, different identities like your sexual identity or your gender identity can intersect with other things like race or class. So considering these many intersectional identities, could you shed some light on how LGBT rights are being tackled through that lens in your country? Anybody want to tackle this question? Just give a wave and we'll unmute you. All right, Grace, up to bat. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think one example of how this is being done is that people who are working on women's rights, who are working on children's rights, indigenous people's rights in the ASEAN region, for instance, the Southeast Asian region of Asia, are having to work together simply because the human rights commissioners who are represented by the member states are discriminating against and deliberately excluding particular groups of people. So sometimes common oppressions bring people together in a particular way. It also strengthens the advocacy. So rather than just having LGBT people talk about how LGBT people are struggling and the violations that they're experiencing, other groups who are fighting for their rights are bringing in LGBT rights and integrating it into their work. Because the question is, what is LGBT rights? Many people don't even know what that is. And the answer is, well, it's the right to adequate housing, it's the right to jobs, it's the right to safety, it's the right to food, it's the right to health services. I mean, all those are LGBT rights. But many people don't realize that, because they think that when LGBT people are talking about their rights, they're only talking about, you know, the right to have sex with a same-sex partner, the right to dress in a particular way, to express your gender in a particular way. And while all of that is true, and everybody, not just LGBT people, have the right to do that, all other issues, you know, from poverty to labor rights to safety and security on the ground, affect us. So that, I think, is beginning to change the way that advocacy is done. And it's a powerful way to convince the state and to convince legislators that when they think about LGBT rights, they need to think about it in a comprehensive way. So that's one of the ways in which the work is happening, at least in some of the Asian countries that we're familiar with.
Okay, Margarita, would you, I see that you would like to answer that question as well. Could you unmute yourself and share?
Yeah, well, about Greece, as I said, things are a bit better, but not good enough. Right now, according to ILGA statistics, Greece is numbered in 23 among 47 European countries in terms of human rights to LGBT people. Many things have been changing, and one reason is EU, European Union. Greece has to somehow comply with some EU legislation, which is very good in terms of human rights and LGBT rights. But, for example, and I'm taking from Grace, when I was discussing with a group of young people, 17 years old, 18 years old, and we were talking about rights, and actually we were talking about the right of LGBT people to get married, like same-sex marriages. And then they said, it's a kind of naivety, because they were thinking like, okay, there's no need to get married. You can live together and nobody stops you from having sex, but why they should get married? And they couldn't move their thought forward to all these other rights that a partnership comes with. But when I start challenging, let's say, and we start bringing some other focus into the discussion, I thought that they are really puzzled. So this naivety is, as I said, once again, because of ignorance and because nobody has given them the possibility to reflect on these issues. And then the other thing is that, at least my experience says that the state is, decisions are made from politicians, and they are based on this political power. So if we educate the public, then the politicians will have to follow, because right now they think, and they cannot move forward because they think that giving some rights that everybody deserves, it will deprive them from votes. So the only way to change that is to educate people about these issues. That's why I really big put an emphasis in education. And for example, and my final example, Greece has been condemned from the European Court of Human Rights because they didn't allow civil partnership for same-sex people, and that was considered to be a discrimination. And that happened, the Greek law passed in 2008 and the contempt in 2012 or 13, like recently. Still, they cannot change that law and provide civil partnerships to same-sex people as they should, because they think that they will lose votes because of that. So I think we really have to discuss it on political terms, this conversation. Thank you.
I think for Ugandan situation, what we've done is we've greatly worked with the feminist movement. The feminist movement has been a very great backbone and supporter for building, but also supporting the LGBTI movement, to the extent that we're able to actually form what we call the Civil Society Coalition on Human Rights and Constitutional Law, a coalition that was dedicated to fight the anti-homosexuality law. And this coalition has some religious organizations, it has feminist organizations, it has LGBT organizations, but it also has human rights organizations that do not have to necessarily work on LGBTI issues. But all this came up because there were a dedicated team of LGBT activists, but also feminist activists who felt the importance and who realized that actually the kind of discrimination, the kind of isolation that women face in the society to be marginalized was the same issue that, or was the same circumstances that LGBTI people were going through. And this kind of support and this kind of formation on working together has been a very, very great force. And why the LGBTI community stands up to now is that through partnership, we've been able to push different forums where an LGBTI person wouldn't go, a feminist would go, and before we knew it, doors started to open to LGBTI persons in terms of dialogue and everything. But all this was after we came to understand the kind of importance around alliances and working together as partners, because sometimes it's very difficult to just walk into an office and say, I'm an activist for LGBTI rights, but it would be a different scenario if a woman activist went in, or someone from the other human rights body working on different issues. Like we have issues of ethnic minorities in our country, and so working together has been a very great great thing, and we identified a common ground, and we're able to form the civil society coalition that is actually now working on behalf of other civil society organizations to fight some of these draconian laws. Yeah, thank you.
Go ahead. So we have another comment. Grace, you're going to provide some context on this, and Leanna's going to jump in as well. So the comment is regarding the situation in Singapore. There is no legal recognition based on gender. The current law of 377A only criminalizes sexual activities which are deemed grossly unacceptable. LGBT partners remain unrecognized in the face of the law. So that's from Zenith. Grace, could you provide some context on that? Unmute yourself first.
Yeah, I wanted to respond to something that was said a little earlier that seemed to give the impression that 377A, which is in the Penal Code of Singapore, that criminalizes particular kinds of sexual activities, now limited to sex between men, does not affect lesbians. Singapore actually had both 377 as well as 377A. 377 covered heterosexual people, oral sex, anal sex, and 377A was a law that specifically talked about sex between men and particular kinds of sex. 377, which was covered heterosexual people, was repealed and removed, I believe, in 2009. However, 377A was retained. So that is like blatant discrimination right there. And although the language of the law specifically talks about sex between men, it doesn't mean that this does not affect lesbians. I mean, the very presence of particular laws, whether it's a law against homosexuality, whether it's a law against cross-dressing, or a law against, people who appear to be of the opposite sex, gender impersonation laws, for example, and a whole host of other laws, it has a chilling effect on people, how they live, how they are on the streets, how they are at work. People are afraid that they will be found out. And on top of that, when people know that there are laws, it also means that those who want to blatantly discriminate and mistreat people know that they can get away with it. And there is really no mechanism for people to seek any kind of redress. So for instance, if you're discriminated against in your job, and you know that that's because either you are perceived as, or that people know that you might be gay or lesbian or trans, then where do you go for redress? Because the law basically criminalizes you and treats you as a felon. So the language doesn't specifically have to say it's only, just because it says it's only about sex between men or a certain kind of sex, that it doesn't affect people who are not necessarily included in that language. I just wanted to say that.
Go ahead, Leanna.
Thank you so much, Chris, for clearing that up a bit. And yeah, it is very blunt way of doing it, because there was basically 377, which criminalized everyone for the same things. But they took that one out, and then 377A only specifically directs towards men. So that is very blunt. So could I see the question? Okay. Also, there's also another code which is 294A, which basically criminalizes people for obscene acts. So it may not necessarily be an action or doing it, but something like simple, like getting together or something like that, can also be criminalized as well.
Okay, Caleb, you have something to add. Can you unmute yourself, Caleb?
I always get upset when people presume that the state gives you rights. The state does not give you rights. It acknowledges those rights. It defends and enforces those rights. What the state does is erode, abuse, and restricts the rights without accountability. And in our work, when we do LGBT work and we're making our concerns visible, we're holding states accountable for the lack of enforcement and protection. That's one thing. The next thing is we presume that we don't have any protection in local laws despite the visible reference. In our work here in Belize and across the region, we've come to learn if we are aware of certain parameters within the existing laws, we can use those laws to get the protection that we need. But first, we must understand what our local laws offer in terms of protection to go after it. What we've seen across the region is an attempt to visibilize the social and cultural experience of LGBT. What we have failed to do is to increase our knowledge about the visibility and existing protections that exist in state laws across the region, and that in itself is a work in progress. These are things I wanted to offer to see that whether it's research in Asia or Africa, we do have spaces to use existing laws creatively to get the help we need. We just need to be aware of what it is.
Okay, so that is the end of the World Pride Human Rights Conference, our online pre-conference. We're speakers, Grace, Richard, Margarita, Jacob. If you're still there, we're looking forward to welcoming you in Toronto. And we have just one comment from the speaker. From the lead volunteer staff says we're looking forward to welcoming the world to Toronto next week for a global dialogue about LGBT rights. Our conference website is www.wphrc14.com. You can also find World Pride Human Rights Conference on Facebook and continue the discussion. Okay, so thanks everybody. Happy Pride, and that's it. Thanks for joining us. See you in Toronto.
Yay.